Hey everyone, I'm your host Anthony. We do content like this weekly, so hit the subscribe button and ring the bell to get notified. If you want more content like this, click the like button and please leave a comment. Thanks again for watching. Thank you everyone for coming and welcome to our live class. We're very excited to have you here and looking forward to a great lecture today. My name is Anthony and I'll be your host. I'm joined on the line by Dr. Carrie Jones, Medical Director at Precision Analytical, who will be conducting most of the presentation today. I'm going to pass it off to her momentarily to kick off today's presentation on the topic of understanding the cortisol awakening response. But before we get started, I'd like to go over just a few housekeeping items. I've muted everyone by default. And secondly, if you have any questions during the course of this live class, please submit them in the chat panel. The questions will all come to me as the host, and I will be conducting a live Q&A with Dr. Jones at the end of the presentation. With that said, I'd like to hand it off to Dr. Jones to begin the presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Anthony. I appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for joining us live. This is 45 to 60 minutes of understanding the cortisol awakening response to better understand alertness, resiliency, and autoimmune. As he said, I am the medical director for Precision Analytical, the creators of the Dutch test, which we will touch on the testing of the cortisol awakening response for a couple of slides, but the majority of it is going to be what is the CAR and how do we treat the CAR, including a case presentation. My entire objective with this and why I'm so passionate about the cortisol awakening response, or CAR, is that it's so helpful for so many things and it's super straightforward to test and address. It doesn't take a lot. It's not an expensive thing to try to move the needle on, but man, can it make a really big impact on how your patients survive and thrive throughout their daily life. So that's what we're going to talk about. In addition, we're going to talk about things like common causes of flatlined CAR, why timing is everything when it comes to treating the CAR, and how to work with brain signaling all the way down to the mitochondria to improve that CAR, because it's definitely a multi-step process. So let's jump right in and cover some basics. I know you know this, but I just want to set the stage as to where we are and where we're headed. So we have our central fight, flight, freeze, and some of you may include fawn in there, but if we say fight, flight, freeze response, what happens is you get the sensory nerve input from anywhere in the body, and it runs through the amygdala. Our amygdala is our fear-based emotional center up in the brain. And it's the reason like we have a healthy dose of fear, where most of us, not everybody has a healthy dose of fear, but it's the reason where I give this example. It's like if you didn't have an amygdala, or if you didn't have a very well conditioned amygdala, you might see a tiger out in the wild and think to yourself, I like cats. Cats love me. I'm totally a cat person. I'm going to go pet this big cat. But when you've got the amygdala there, the amygdala is like, hello, run. Like, this is a problem. We need to not fight it, but flight it, like right now. Don't even freeze. What happens with the amygdala, though, is that because it's our fear-based emotional center, is that when it gets triggered over and over and over again, it can become conditioned to trigger very quickly, maybe quicker than you would want it. And so working with the amygdala, working with the brain, is really important and really helpful for how we deal with our fight, flight, freeze response. But anyhow, all these threats, the stress gets passed through the amygdala. The amygdala is your gatekeeper, and it decides like, yes, it truly is a cat, or no, it's a tiger. We need to run. And then it shifts over to a part of your hypothalamus in your brain that handles the communication. So we release CRH, the hypothalamus, once we decide it's a worthy, stressful response should happen. CRH comes out down to the pituitary, which releases ACTH. ACTH helps to release aldosterone, DHEA, DHEAS, cortisol, and it helps with the production of norepinephrine and epinephrine. ACTH does not release your catecholamines, but it does help the production. But primarily, it's cortisol that we focus on. So if we zoom down from the brain all the way down to your two adrenal glands sitting on top of your kidneys, we have the adrenal cortex, which is the biggest, thickest part of your adrenal gland, and with good reason. Your adrenal cortex is where you've got your zona glomerulosa for aldosterone. That actual part of it's pretty thin. your zona fasciculata, which is actually the majority of your cortex, because cortisol is so important. And then you have the reticularis, which is where you make androgens like DHEA and DHEAS. Not as thick as the fasciculata, but still thicker than the glomerulosa. Then underneath that, we have the medulla, and the medulla are where you make your catecholamines like norepinephrine and epinephrine. And remember, the body always has low-grade norepinephrine running around. But in order to make epinephrine, you have to have substantial amounts of cortisol. So one of the cofactors in making epinephrine is cortisol. So you don't have epinephrine low grade running around all the time unless you have cortisol really spiking it all the time. So keep that in mind. Norepinephrine's always hanging around. Epinephrine needs cortisol for it to be made. Once we get deep, deep, deep into these layers, right, we're going to look at the mitochondria. So the mitochondria is where the actual cortisol is being produced. Your cholesterol, actually, you've got these lipid droplets are all around the mitochondria. So they get pulled in, and your P450 side chain there will convert it into pregnenolone. Pregnenolone leaves temporarily and goes to the endoplasmic reticulum, where it comes back into the mitochondria as your 11-deoxy, and then 11-deoxy becomes your cortisol. So you can see all the way up from the brain, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the pituitary, down to your zona fasciculata, but specifically in the mitochondria of your adrenal glands is where the magic happens. And I point this out because on social media, when I talk about the mitochondria several months ago, I had a very well-meaning, person who was training in the health field say to me, "Oh, Dr. Jones, I'm so bummed that you've jumped on the mitochondrial bandwagon. I wish you would just stick with talking about the adrenal glands." And I thought, ooh, you don't understand physiology. It's literally the adrenal glands that are the first and last step for cortisol production. So do not forget your mitochondria when you are working with somebody who has low cortisol. This is where it's at. So quick facts about your cortisol. Obviously, we all know it follows the circadian rhythm. And it starts with the cortisol awakening response, which is the star of this show. And roughly 1 to 5% of your cortisol is free. It's the free cortisol that's active and can bind to the glucocorticoid receptors and do the things. And of course, we know cortisol can bind to other receptors like mineralocorticoid receptors. But primarily, we hope it goes to the glucocorticoid. And the rest of your cortisol is bound up to cortisol binding globulin, albumin, or excreted as metabolized cortisol and cortisone. So your free is only a very small percent, and the rest of your cortisol is other places or bound up. Now, if we continue on that fight, flight, freeze response, because the cortisol, I don't know if you know this, cortisol takes roughly 10 minutes to be created and pushed out into circulation. So if you are about to get into a car accident, if you read a very upsetting text message, if you, see a bad email or about to watch something happen that you don't want to happen, it's not cortisol that's going to give you that like response. It's going to be your catecholamines, but they have to be released pretty immediately, whereas cortisol lags behind. So the hypothalamus transmits a signal down your spinal cord. Both the chemical messenger and nerve impulses travel to the same destination, which is your medulla. And of course, your norepinephrine and epinephrine, which are stored in vesicles, immediately get released. And poof, you now have the ability to have a fight, flight, or freeze response when you're stressed out, with cortisol coming minutes afterwards. That leads me to allostasis, allostatic load, and resiliency. Resiliency is the word of late. Of course, everyone's talking about resiliency, whether it's your health, whether it's your business, your finances, surviving this pandemic, whatever it is. So just a quick little bit of definition. We have allostasis, which is the ability to achieve stability through change. And this is really what we're going for as humans. Change is inevitable, right? Like the only constants are death, taxes, and change. So we have to be able to, as a body, as a human body, be able to ride the waves and come back to some sort of stability. That's allostasis. Well, our load, our allostatic load, is the accumulated wear and tear resulting from daily life and everything else, which may lead to disease over time. And many of you probably use the bucket analogy. You've got this bucket, and the water is getting dripped in. That's all the stuff, that's all the wear and tear and things that are coming in your life. And eventually the bucket overfloweth and poof, you have disease. And that's your allostatic load that your body is struggling with. And so as practitioners, we're trying to ease the load, empty the bucket so that they can avoid or slow down the progression of disease. And that leads me to resiliency. The resiliency is the ability to quickly bounce back from stressful situation. It's our coping ability. Prior to 2020, we may have said that we had pretty good resiliency. Our coping was really good. Give us 12 full months of everything that was gone through. And now I would imagine a number of our clients and patients are really struggling with coping. They're not as adept at stability. They're not as adept at bouncing back as they used to be. They feel more triggered from a stress response. They feel more triggered from an autoimmune response. They feel more triggered in the way that they handle life compared to where they were. That amygdala was really given a run for its money and it's trying to protect you. So visually, this is what it looks like. We have acute stress, which is the little scary face, mild stressor. You get a sympathetic stress reaction that leads to a parasympathetic rebound, and we return to normal. This is ideal. This is what we want. Unfortunately, when we get the stressor, we get a strong sympathetic stress response. This is, of course, when an acute stress becomes a chronic stress over time. We get a failure to handle it, right? We get a failure to discharge the sympathetic arousal, therefore failure to recover to normal. And now these people are in our office or on our telemedicine or in our DMs, and they're saying, I can't, I feel terrible. I'm not sleeping. My autoimmune is bad. I'm in pain. I feel inflamed. My hormones are a mess. I'm super tired. I'm getting panic, et cetera, et cetera. And it's because they have this complete imbalance in their sympathetic and parasympathetic. So as we see that a lot of things go into our allostatic load, and a lot of things go into our ability for allostasis, right? Stability or adaptation. And we're trying to find a nice balance between the two, but it's everything from how we grew up to major life events, environmental stressors, which we cannot avoid, we cannot ignore, individual differences, right? Why is it like you handle things just fine, but your neighbor is falling apart? Individual differences, genes, development, experiences, what have you, behavioral responses. Some people fight, some people flight, some people freeze, plus our lifestyle habits. All of this goes into our bucket, our allostatic bucket, and eventually can cause it to overflow. So what happens is your patients start to ask you, or maybe you're asking yourself, why can I not handle stress like I used to? I used to be so good at handling stress, and now I feel like the littlest thing and I'm a mess. I'm either really angry or I'm very stressed out, or I have anxiety, or I'm crying, or it makes me really tired. Why can't I handle stress like I used to? So it's the concept of resiliency. Do you have the flexibility or adaptability to survive your environment? Can you be like this little flower growing up in the cracks of the sidewalk and radiating joy and radiating warmth and radiating beauty? Do you have that concept of resiliency? And it's important because, as we know, the less flexible the whole body system is, or the slower we are to adapt, the less able to survive and thrive in an environment. If you think about animals in the wild, if they're slow to adapt, they're not usually going to make it, right? They're not usually going to survive and thrive in their environment. And humans are absolutely no different. I sometimes refer to this as the trampoline effect. Everyone's been on a trampoline at some point in their life, or you know what a trampoline is. Heck, they have an Olympic competition around trampolining. So picture the trampoline as your trampoline of life. And when you're young, your trampoline is very bouncy. It's very stable. It's very able to hold you, and you have a stressful event and you bounce down on the trampoline, and your resiliency pushes you right back up. And then you next stressful event and you bounce on the trampoline and your resiliency pushes you right back up. But over time, if you keep hitting that repeated bounce on the trampoline, your wear and tear takes effect. And now your springs aren't as tightly coiled as they used to be. Your net that you would fall into, the trampoline cover is getting kind of threadbare. And now your foot pokes through, or now your trampoline hits the ground and is taking a little longer to get you back up into the air. And maybe you don't get up into the air as high as you used to. So that's what we're talking about here. It's why I call it the trampoline effect, is you're losing that adaptation and you're losing that resiliency. So let's talk about how this stress is typically assessed. We know that stress is definitely a big, and I mean stress from everything. I don't just mean like, man, it's been a bad day, or the news sucks, or I got a terrible email. We know that stress across the board can be environmental, it can be mental, it can be physical, it can be chemical. We also know that stress can be actual, it can be anticipated, and it can be imagined. So for those of you who like to make mountains out of molehills, who like to anticipate the worst, your body is reacting the same way. Your amygdala is having to make the same decisions as if the stress were really in front of you. So I challenge you to really think about that if you are a mountain out of molehill type of person. If it's out of your control, or you don't actually know if that's going to happen, you're just a worst case scenario person, then it's going to continue to trigger your HPA axis. It's going to continue to trigger your amygdala. I'll give you a perfect example. My mother is a mountain out of a molehill person, and I learned by watching her not to be. As a result, I am not a worst case scenario person. I don't make mountains out of molehills, but I watch her HPA axis compared to mine, and it's a really good learning opportunity. So when you have those patients or clients that come to you and everything is a worry, everything is a DEFCON 10, everything is a concern, the body is going to react the exact same way as if it really were the truth. So work with them to navigate that. Because when we get into stress testing, traditional endocrinology says there's two stages. You are either Addison's or you are either Cushing's, and otherwise you are normal, right? Everything else is just fine. You're fine. I don't know why you're tired. You're totally normal. Well, you're not Addison's, so you're completely normal. I don't know what the problem is. And I would propose a functional endocrinology view, which is where we have this adaptive, right? So we do have Addison's, of course, and we do have Cushing's, of course. But you can also not be, it's not black and white. It's very, I would say gray, but in this example, it's red, orange, and then green. So we have low cortisol. We have this adaptive cortisol. You can be normal cortisol, and then you can hit the other end. You can be like adapting towards the high end or leaning towards the high end. You can be high, but not Cushing's, or, God forbid, you can be full out Cushing's. And so by looking at this functional endocrinology model, you see that when you're looking at cortisol, it's not as black and white as endocrinology would want it to be. And that's where the Dutch Plus comes in. So I'm going to talk just a few slides on the Dutch Plus, and we'll move right into the car. So the Dutch Plus is a combination test that we offer where we look at all things hormones, but specifically we go deep on cortisol. So it's a combination dried urine and the cortisol awakening response using saliva tubes. So for dried urine samples, and what are going to give you all the hormones that you want, your estrogens, your progesterone, your testosterone, your DHEAS, the metabolites, your estrogen phase 1 and phase 2 metabolism, melatonin, some organic acids, what have you. I don't know who's drawing on my slides. That's funny. Is that you, Anthony?
It was not me. I'm so sorry about that. Not sure what's going on there.
Let's see if I can clear it. I can clear it. There we go.
Thank you.
Got it. All right. And then on top of the 4 dried urine samples, we can do 5 saliva swab samples. And the saliva swabs are important over tubes because we're trying to get the cortisol awakening response, which is very, very, very specific. And then you get the extra overnight sample if somebody says, I have insomnia, I can't sleep, I can't fall asleep, I can't stay asleep, I wake up at midnight, I wake up at 2 a.m. So by doing all of this, it's a very comprehensive look at your patient. It's 9 collection points, but with 9 collections, you get more data points for patient care. So why all the data points? Why do you care for all the data points? Because in traditional 4-point collection that many of you are used to, maybe you've just done saliva 4 points through the day. Maybe you've done our Dutch Complete, which is 4 urinary samples throughout the day. And by that, I mean, it's collected in the morning, it's collected a couple hours later. It's collected in the afternoon. And then, of course, it's collected at night before bed. But we know that this is not enough information. And we know that this does not include the cortisol awakening response. And this is the whole point of this webinar. We're talking about stress. We're talking about resiliency. We're talking about your allostatic bucket. We're talking about trying to survive and thrive and calm down that amygdala of yours. And so by having a healthy cortisol awakening response, what they say is it's been repeatedly been suggested that the CAR could be a result of the anticipated demands of the upcoming day and could support coping with daily life stress. I think a lot of people that come to us for support, coping with daily life stress is one of the things that they say they need help with. They may not use those terms exactly, but they'll say things like, I'm really tired, right? I'm really tired. I can't sleep. I feel burned out. I am so moody. My autoimmune is not doing well. I keep progressing and it's not stopping. I'm not alert. I have brain fog. I'm gaining weight, et cetera, et cetera. They're not coping with their daily life stress. It just manifests different for them in their body. So let me explain how the CAR is different than your traditional sort of like 4-point throughout the day. So when you're asleep, your adrenal gland down regulates glucocorticoid receptors. It like pulls its arms in through the night because it's sleeping. It doesn't want ACTH to bind. So as you get closer and closer to the wake up time, your pituitary gland is like, now, can we do it now? Can we go now? And the adrenals are like, oh, not now, not now. So there's a blunting effect that happens. Once you open your eyes and your body recognizes you're conscious and light comes into your eyes, the light goes into your SCN, your suprachiasmatic nucleus, and the blunting releases. Now your receptors come fully out. You are able to bind ACTH and cortisol rises sharply. Now, when I say sharply, I mean sharply, like a mountain. It goes straight up. You get at least a 50% increase, sometimes a lot more, 100 to 150% increase in about the first 30 minutes. That switches you from conscious to alert. That's the highest point of your cortisol in the day, right then and there, within 30 minutes of waking up. That's it. That's as good as it gets. So you better hope that it's a good one, because after that, your cortisol goes down, down, down gradually. You for sure may have blips if you get stressed, if you're hypoglycemic, if you're working through something, but it should come back down to the baseline until it's nice and low at night. So if we focus in on that rising sharply in about 30 minutes of waking to get you from conscious to alert, this is where my cheater question comes into play. So I often ask the question, how long does it take you to feel alert and ready to go in the morning? If you say to me, yeah, about 30 minutes. If you're thinking about this and you're like, yeah, I'm pretty alert within about 30 minutes without caffeine, just on your own accord. Within about 30 minutes, are you alert? You have a pretty healthy cortisol awakening response. If you say to me, well, actually, Carrie, it takes me about 2 cups of coffee and 2 hours to get going, then I can tell you right there, you probably don't have a very healthy cortisol awakening response. Same goes for those of you who say, well, I wake up and go straight to a DEFCON 10. I wake up and immediately I feel anxious. I feel panic. I feel nervous. I'm hypervigilant. I can't breathe it down. Like I'm already just like to the roof. Then you have an overactive cortisol awakening response. So understanding just that little quick bit in the morning is helpful. The other reason it's helpful, and we get into this when we talk about treatments, is again, it's about a 30-minute window-ish. So start asking your patients and clients, what happens for you when you wake up in the morning? Do you wake up with? So let's say they say to you, I have joint pain. When do you have joint pain? Do you wake up with it? Yes, I wake up with joint pain. And after about like a while, after I get moving, get out of bed, get going, after about 30 to 60 minutes, it starts to get better. This is related. This is different than, no, I have joint pain all day, right? Those people, autoimmune, whatever their autoimmune symptoms are, they're telling you about their autoimmune symptoms. And you say to them, you wake up and feel the worst? Oh my gosh, yes. When I wake up, I feel horrible. But then I get moving and I get going and I go from about a 10 to about a 6. It gets better as I get going. Okay. All right. We're working with cortisol to a degree here. So by just reining in the timing with your patients, it can give you a lot of information if cortisol is playing a role. So ask them how long it takes them to feel alert in the morning. Ask them, when are their symptoms the worst? Do you wake up with? Not just generally the morning, because the morning means a lot of things to a lot of people. You tell people to take their supplements in the morning. Here, take this ashwagandha in the morning. Some will take it on waking. Some will take it after breakfast. Some will forget and take it at lunch and call it good enough. So make sure you're talking about waking as opposed to morning. There is a difference. So how do we measure that cortisol awakening response? Because it's in the first 30 minutes. So we have to act very quickly. We do it with saliva swabs, not saliva tubes, because of that collection. So the first collection is immediately on waking. You're going to take the little saliva swabs out of the Dutch Plus kit, wake up, pop it in your mouth, get it wet, stick it back in the tube. 30 minutes later, you're going to do it again. Makes sense? I told you, you've got about 30 minutes. So 30 minutes later, do it again. Then I want to see where you are at the 60-minute mark. Do you keep going up? Do you flatline? Do you start going down for the rest of your day? Ideally, you should be going down by collection 3. The rebound should happen and you should start to go down, down, down. Of course, you have a 4th collection around dinner, a 5th collection around bedtime. And if you have insomnia, you're going to do a 6th collection if you can't sleep or wake up in the middle of the night. So this is what it looks like. At waking, you have a baseline cortisol level. You should wake up, you've already got some cortisol happening. Then you go up, steep rise like a mountain. Then you come down roughly 30 minutes later. This is ideally what your cortisol awakening response should look like. And remember, this is very zoomed in. This is micro focused. We're looking at the 30 and 60 mark, not a broad sweeping view of morning to noon or morning to 2 hours later. This is very hyper focused. What happens to you in 30 minutes? The bedtime and dinner time sample are still extremely important because of your overall circadian rhythm. I want to know if your nighttime point goes up. Does it go down? What's going on with it? Is the afternoon low and that's why you're tired? Is it high and that's why you have anxiety? Or struggle with blood sugar, or start working through blood sugar issues. So it's still important to get the full circadian rhythm for the rest of your day. So what all does the CAR influence? Well, I've already talked about alertness, and we've already talked about resiliency and energy levels, and it's the level of feeling stressed out. If when people ask you, how are you? And your only response lately has been, I am so stressed out. Your cortisol obviously can have a big play with that. Blood sugar management. We know that cortisol's primary job is glucose management, right? If cortisol had a resume or a CV, its number one job that it does, or that it would be applying for, is blood sugar management. It's a glucocorticosteroid for a reason. Gluco, because glucose is the number one thing it does. Yes, cortisol helps with stress. Yes, cortisol helps lower inflammation. Yes, cortisol plays an impact in our immune system, for sure. But what it does, along with your catecholamines, is glycogenolysis and gluconeogenesis. So it's a blood sugar manager. If you can't get your blood sugar under control, you will never get your HPA axis under control. And vice versa. If you have very low cortisol and you struggle with hypoglycemia, you're going to continue to struggle because you need cortisol to help you with glucose. So they are best friends. They go hand in hand. Autoimmune development and progression, also the title of this. And when I get to the case study, I'll explain it more. But it is called, it's when you are working through something called central tolerance. So in your thymus gland, not thyroid, but thymus, which sits here behind your sternum, behind your chest bone, your thymus gland plays a massive role in your immune system. So your thymus gland is like the end of T cell school. So in your immune system, you make T cells. And when you make a T cell, they are naive, or they're new, and they're like bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and they don't know what's going on. And so the body sends them to T cell school, which happens to be in your thymus gland. And what it does is it goes through this progression of determining if the T cell is going to react to known sequences in your body. So let me just keep it really simple. Thyroid, let's say thyroid peroxidase, that we're thinking Hashimoto's. So the thymus gland will take a naive T school and run it across thyroid peroxidase and see if it reacts negatively. If the T cell reacts negatively, meaning that it's already been pre-programmed to go after the enzyme thyroid peroxidase, then it's essentially failed. It can't do that. That's autoimmune. So the thymus gland is like, oh my gosh, T cell, thank you very much. But you have failed and now you must die. One of the big triggers for killing your T cells is the cortisol awakening response. It's the sharp rise in cortisol in the morning that is a big trigger for the apoptosis of those failed T cells. Now, if you don't have a cortisol awakening response, let's say you're flatlined or you go down, and you struggle with autoimmune and you notice your autoimmune symptoms are especially worse in the morning, they definitely could go hand in hand. Because what I imagine is if they're not getting killed because the cortisol rise isn't there, some of them at the very least are going to sneak out and go into circulation. And that could be really pretty problematic. So we need the cortisol awakening response to help with central tolerance. It's like the checks and balances of central tolerance, or what I refer to as T cell school. So we don't want our T cells that have failed T cell school, so they're autoimmune, to go back out in circulation. We know that the car has a big impact on inflammatory regulation. Think about how many times have you woken up in the morning and thought you were inflamed? This hurt, that hurt. Maybe you thought you were sick. Oh my God, the Rona got me. I feel terrible. And after like 15, 30, 45 minutes of you actually getting out of bed and moving around and drinking some water, you're like, oh, I actually feel pretty good. I don't think I'm sick. I actually think I'm doing okay, because your cortisol went up and it's anti-inflammatory to a point. Same for infection regulation, right? You wake up, you think, oh my gosh, this is it. But the cortisol rise helps keep it under control. Memory and recall, cortisol plays a big role, especially the cortisol awakening response and laying down the long-term memory in the brain. So if you struggle tomorrow, if you're thinking to yourself, what was it that Carrie talked about yesterday? You probably have inappropriate cortisol awakening response and you're struggling with your memory and recall. And then cancer outcomes, breast cancer in particular, but prostate cancer has been shown as well. When you have a flattened diurnal curve. So again, instead of going up like a mountain and down the rest of the day, if it's more flat, then they have worse prognosis, specifically in breast cancer. So those of you who work with oncology and work with breast cancer patients, check their cortisol awakening response, check their whole diurnal rhythm, and make sure that they are getting that big boost of cortisol in a healthy manner in the morning and then declining the rest of the day. So with low CAR, issues with alertness, resilience, and autoimmune, what do we do about it? So here's an example. This is not my case example, but this is a practitioner friend of mine who has given me permission to show her cortisol awakening response. Now, remember, these are 5 points, but the first 3 points are zoomed in the first hour of the day. So this practitioner friend of mine said, Carrie, I literally need 8 cups of coffee to get going. I cannot get out of bed. I hit my snooze button 6,000 times. It's a struggle. And even then I start to feel okay in the afternoon. And then it's time for bed. Like, this is not the way to lead my life. So we checked her car, and you can see by the 3 arrows, she's the highlighted line and she should be in the gray shaded area. She is not. She is well below that. So it's no wonder this person was struggling, this practitioner. And the reason I'm showing you this is to show you, like, practitioners are just as guilty. We need to heal ourselves as well. So first and foremost, when it comes to treatment of the cortisol awakening response, always assume Addison's has been ruled out. Now, Addison's is generally a very low flat line. This example is not Addison's. This person has a rhythm, even though they're low in the morning. If it was Addison's, they would be really low, like down near 0 and sort of flat across the day. But if you see that, make sure you rule them out for Addison's. Never assume. Now, you have to understand why somebody has a low cortisol awakening response. What's going on? What's the why behind it? There are a lot of reasons you're going to work through. Any kind of hippocampal damage. It's the hippocampus that controls the output of the cortisol awakening response signaling. Excessive amounts of psychological burnout. Remember the concept and the term around burnout. was originally started for healthcare practitioners. So we are just as included as everyone else. Sleep deprivation. So talking to your patients around sleep apnea, disordered breathing, mouth breathing, snoring, really screws up the car the next day. Traumatic brain injury or any damage to the hypothalamus or pituitary, which makes sense, of course. Anything that will affect signaling or increase inflammation up there in the brain can be a big problem. Chronic pain, infection, or inflammation anywhere in the body, over time, you get this HPA axis down regulation. Poor HPA communication in general, because it starts with the brain. And that can be for a variety of reasons, whether it's from traumatic brain injury, whether it's because you sit slumped over in your chair all day long and you never sit up straight. And so blood flow and structure are all kind of messed up. Maybe you've had a history of car accidents in your younger years and you never really quite got it fixed. And so your neck and upper shoulders are kind of a tight mess. All of that can affect the way your signaling from the brain heads down south. Mitochondrial dysfunction. Of course, this is where cortisol starts and ends in its production. So we want to focus on the mitochondria. History of PTSD, it does depend on the trauma and the distance from the trauma. When you look up PTSD data and the cortisol awakening response, obviously the more acute and traumatic it is, they will have a higher, spikier CAR. And over time, or depending on the type of trauma, it may drop down to be a lower CAR. And so if you are not in the field of trauma with your patients, that's not the area you work on, at least ask them if they have any diagnoses or history or suspect any kind of PTSD, because that will play a role with their CAR. Seasonal affective disorder, those of you who live in the Pacific Northwest like me, where it rains, like 9 months of the year, are really affected by this, which is why light is so important. Fluorescent lights can be suppressive to the overall HPA axis and suppressive medications. So steroids, think your prednisone, your steroid nasal sprays, your steroid allergy inhalers, your long-term steroid cream use, that can all play a role. Opioid pain medication, Accutane, in other countries it's known as Roaccutane, and aspirin. And the aspirin study that I saw was on one big dose of aspirin. I believe it was 600 milligrams. I have not seen any studies on baby aspirin and cortisol. So if one big dose is enough that it could suppress cortisol production, all the people who are taking maybe either regular strength or baby aspirin every day for heart health or other various reasons, and you see that they have a low cortisol awakening response, it could play a role. Not everyone who takes aspirin has this effect, but some people do. So just keep an eye on it for your aspirin users. So when I said earlier that there's the feedback loop, this is the feedback loop. So over time, of course, stressors, inflammation, infection, you're making lots of cortisol, and then that cortisol goes back up to the hypothalamus and it goes back up to the pituitary, and we get this decrease in cortisol. So short of medications, if you're working with somebody with low cortisol, they had high cortisol prior, and this feedback loop kicked in. Now, medications is different. Medications are automatically suppressive because of the way they work. But if somebody's like, oh my gosh, I've got really low cortisol, ask them what it was like 6 months ago, a year ago, 5 years ago, because I bet in their story, they would make it seem like their cortisol was actually quite high. And then the feedback loop kicked in. I suspect in the next year or so, working at a lab that tests cortisol, we're going to see a lot of low cortisols just because of the way 2020 and 2021 is playing out as far as stress for a lot of people. That cortisol is riding higher now. People are amped, on edge, hypervigilant. And eventually, as they keep that up, the feedback loop could kick in, and we're going to see actually a lot more low cortisols over time, which is different than Edison's, of course. This is not autoimmune. I just mean the feedback loop. So here's the female case. It's a woman in her 40s. She's got fatigue, especially in the morning. She requires 2 to 4 cups of coffee to get ready. She has sleep apnea, but she doesn't use her sleep machine. She has Hashimoto's antibodies have greatly increased recently. And she says, I feel more thyroid, quote, thyroid symptoms. And as you can see, if we zoom in on that, her cortisol, she's the blue line, her cortisol awakening response goes down And then it like kind of rebounds and then goes down for the rest of the day. So her morning is definitely where she's at her worst. It takes her a good hour or more to finally feel normal. So let's improve the car. How do we improve the car? The rest of the slides are primarily on treatment ideas and suggestions. So with any low car, whatever you do, remember I said it's 30 minutes. That's when the blunting releases and all the cortisols produce. So you have 30 minutes to make an impact on the cortisol awakening response when you're working in the morning. So consider doing any of these within 30 minutes of waking and always address their sleep. Now, the one caveat are for those people who take their thyroid medication in the morning. I get it. Thyroid is a diva. She is high maintenance. She wants to be the only thing in your stomach for hours because she doesn't play well with dairy or fiber or phytates or iron or magnesium or anything else, right? Like she wants to be all alone in your stomach. So in those cases, you just have to adapt. You just have to do the best you can. If your patient takes thyroid at 6 a.m., when they wake up, then you maybe won't start any of low cortisol treatment as a supplement until later, like 7 or 8 a.m. If your patient takes their thyroid at night, then it's not an issue. And if some patients I know will set their alarm at 4 or 5 in the morning because they love coffee. So they will take their thyroid at 4 or 5 in the morning, go back to bed. And when they wake up, now they are allowed to have their coffee with creamer. And at that point, they can do their adrenal HPA support as well. So try within 30 minutes of waking. So we're going to start with the brain. We want to do HPA retraining, which is my phrase. It's not really a medical term, but basically we're trying to get up in the morning and down at night. So we want functional uppers in the morning and functional downers at night to get that circadian rhythm. We're going to use adaptogens, nutrients, mitochondrial, and brain support. We're going to use light therapy immediately on waking for the car. And if it's dark out or gray out or raining, then you're going to switch and consider the inexpensive full spectrum lights, and also consider light movement or exercise on waking to just jog the brain of like, all right, we get up, we stretch, we move, we walk the dog, we do a few things. We enjoy the fact that it's the morning and we want to get moving. We're going to retrain our brain. We're going to connect with community and play. Why do I have community and play right here? Because when it comes to freeze, the freeze effect of fight, flight, freeze, they found that community, play, joy, laughing are one of the best ways to get you out of freeze. And it's hard to freeze when you're playing, having fun, being joyful, finding joy, and laughing. So first and foremost, make sure you are talking to your patients about their community, who they have to support them, how they play, and how they find their joy, because that will help shift them out of freeze the fastest. You're going to start with the brain by increasing blood and oxygen. Talk to them about their movement, exercise, cardio, weights, if they're into yoga or things, inversion poses. You're going to talk to them about their breathing. Do they mouth breathe? Should they try mouth taping? Do they need to have a sleep study? Has anyone told them that they snore? Because if so, you're going to work them up for that. If they're a smoker, you're going to work on their smoking cessation ASAP. You're going to talk with them, of course, ad nauseum about their blood sugar, their diet, what they put in their mouth, how they absorb their foods, their gut, etc. Neurofeedback, biotuning, energy medicine, acupuncture, chiropractic, massage, cranial sacral, whatever it takes to support that upper back, shoulders, neck, the energy movement, the lymphatic movement, the blood movement, nerve movement up and down. And for those of you listening to the webinar right now, and you're hunched over, you're looking down, your shoulders are up at your ears like earrings, you're in a weird position, slumped over, straighten yourself up right now, take your chin, pull it back, stop kinking your neck as you're looking down at the phone or your laptop or your tablet, but you want to make sure it's upright so that your breath and your blood and everything can go up and down in a nice manner. And remember this several times a day: pull your shoulders down, sit up straight, pull your chin back, and it makes a massive difference. Brain supplements, of course, to be supportive, they're nice Band-Aids, but things like Bacopa is one of my favorites. Reduces brain inflammation, improves cognition, improves brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Obviously, a lot of things increase BDNF, but exercise. But Bacopa has been shown to as well. Cordyceps, increases learning and memory, endothelial nitric oxide synthase, GABA and glutamate in the brain. It helps support all of those. Omega-3s, I don't think I need to go into why omega-3s are important. Rosemary, if you're into spices, use it as a spice. Grow it in your yard, grow it in your garden. It has been shown to improve NRF2. NRF2 is helpful for phase 2 detoxification. It protects against LPS, lipopolysaccharide damage. It's anti-inflammatory. It increases acetylcholine. If I had to pick a favorite neurotransmitter, it would be acetylcholine. That turns my brain on like nothing else. But rosemary will suppress iron absorption from the gut. So be careful. If you are taking iron because you're anemic or something, just be aware if you're using rosemary also at the same time. Ginkgo, a lot of research on ginkgo, of course, improving blood flow, improving BDNF, neuroprotection. PQQ, many of you may not know PQQ. PQQ came out, it's been around a while, but I think it got a lot more press last year because of its antioxidant effect, and especially in the brain and the mitochondria. Increases nerve growth factor, protects NMDA receptors. It's an antioxidant to peroxynitrite. Peroxynitrite is bad, and of course can screw up your mitochondrial health. Reduces CRP and interleukin 6, your big pro-inflammatory cytokine there. Maca, love maca, great for all things hormones, great for all things hypothalamus and pituitary. Please be aware there are multiple types of maca. Not all maca is created equal. There's different colors, there's different varieties. And so you want to make sure you know which maca you're working with. So adaptogenic support, the adaptogenic support, I only have an hour and the adaptogenic support would probably take up most of that time, but I think a lot of you are understand adaptogens, are familiar with adaptogens, you have your favorite adaptogens. And so just know that in the morning, adaptogenic support could be really helpful for your patient as you're trying to get the whole HPA axis back on track. We want to love up and support our mitochondria. I said earlier that thyroid medication was a diva. Mitochondria are, they're high maintenance. Man, I thought thyroid medication was high maintenance. Mitochondria are high maintenance. Like they don't like to be bumped, bruised. They don't like chemicals. They don't like toxins. They don't like alcohol. They don't like anything, because if that happens, then it can really affect the way that they function and can release a bunch of free radicals. It may damage some of their insides, and now they have to cut off the damaged part, which leaves you with only part of a mitochondria that's functioning. So we really want to support our mitochondria, whether that's things like eating the rainbow so you can get all the antioxidants. Some antioxidants are very, very specific, like CoQ10 is a shuttler of electrons in the mitochondria and the electron transport chain. Your B vitamins, multiple B vitamins are needed to make ATP and to support hormone production. N-acetylcysteine, obviously glutathione, manganese, and zinc all are right within the inner workings of the mitochondria to help fight against reactive oxygen species that occur right there. Your flavonoids, your broccoli seeds, again, your PQQ, vitamin E and vitamin C, melatonin. They've now proven that your mitochondria make its own melatonin because it is such a powerful antioxidant. It's not to the point where it's going to help you like sleep better. It's internal. It's an endocrine hormone being used to fight free radicals. So yay for your mitochondria for doing that. Lipoic acid, your adenosyl B12. Adenosyl is different than your methyl B12. Adenosyl B12 is what helps convert methylmalonyl-CoA into succinyl-CoA to enter the Krebs cycle. So if you are a little weak in your biochemistry, I recommend going back and looking at the Krebs cycle into the electron transport chain, and that's how we make our ATP. But it's adenosyl B12 that works right there. Intermittent fasting helps a lot with biogenesis and the repair of mitochondria. So when you have a mitochondria that's kind of broken. So the analogy I always give is if you're a mitochondria and you have a broken right arm, then you get rid of it. You can cut off your right arm, but now you're a mitochondria without your right arm. And if you're floating around and you see a mitochondria with a right arm, but it's missing its left arm, but you have a totally functioning left arm, then biogenesis is where you come together and you form one bigger, better mitochondria. And now you have a right and left functioning arm, which is very cool that mitochondria can do that. And intermittent fasting, cold plunges, exercise, they all help with that biogenesis, as do a number of other things on this list. Red and near infrared light therapy. So in your electron transport chain, you have something called cytochrome C. Much like CoQ10 is a shuttler of electrons, cytochrome C is also a shuttler of electrons, but it has a photon receptor, meaning light. And so when you get red and near infrared light exposure on your skin, then it like power charges up your cytochrome C to make it happy. And so now it can do a better job at shuttling electrons. But oxygen is the cofactor there. So you have to make sure they're breathing and they don't have sleep apnea and they're not hunched over all day and they're not breathing through their mouth, but they're actually getting oxygen into the places it needs to go. This is not an extensive list, but this is just to get you a running list of why the mitochondria are so cool and all the things that can be really helpful, that while they are high maintenance and that they damage easily, they can also, it appears they can also, they want to be fixed. They can fix easily. So we can do a lot of things to support the neutralizing of free radicals and the improvement of our mitochondrial health. And then, of course, there's things like glandulars. So adrenal glandular extracts. Some of you maybe use brain glandulars from different companies. Obviously, there's very limited to no clinical research available on glandulars, so use at your own risk. I will tell you my personal experience. I've been using glandulars since the dawn of day, forever. And I do tend to prescribe glandulars in very low states. I find them to be very helpful for vitality. I do prescribe them for 3 or 4 months in the morning, specifically in the morning. And then I do retest. So you want to be aware of your insomnia and anxiety type folks, not to do it late in the day at all. So if somebody's doing their glandulars and they forget and they think, oh, I'll just take it at lunch, they could just be aware of these side effects. Sunlight or full spectrum light exposure first thing on waking. It's the cheapest, easiest, freest, tactical thing you can do to help improve your cortisol awakening response. And of course, you want actual exposure in your eyeballs. Don't look at the sun. Don't burn your retinas. Don't be stupid, but open the window, open the door, go outside through your window, through your sunglasses, through your reading glasses. That glass is going to block a lot of it. And so you want to make sure that you actually step outside or open or get some exposure for 10 or so minutes. And like I said earlier, if you are in a dark, dreary area, you can buy pretty inexpensively a full spectrum light box. There are a number of them on the market. Various sizes and shapes and services, and some are wireless and some of them are plug-in, some attached to your computer, some sit on your desk. And so you can just see what would work for you and turn that on for 10 or 15 minutes or more in the morning while you are getting ready. And this full spectrum light, if you don't know, it's what helps set the clock genes. Our clock genes in our brain are what set the rhythm for our body. It's the master clock gene, and then we have baby clock genes in every single gland in our body that sort of respond up to the master clock gene. So the humans are run on a little bit longer than 24 hours in a day. A clock on our wall, the clock on our phone does run on 24 hours, but we as humans run a little bit longer. So every single freaking day, we need to set and reset our clock genes. And so we set it by light and we reset a dysfunctional clock gene by darkness. So you can see, I didn't say ashwagandha and I didn't say yoga and I didn't say intermittent fasting. What I said was light and dark. Those other things help greatly, but not until you get the light and dark dialed in. So if you like to lay in bed because you're too tired and your blackout curtains are pulled and you just lay there for an hour hitting snooze, you're not doing yourself any favors. Get up, open the window, let the light in, the full light in, get up, go outside for a couple minutes. And after a couple of weeks, it'll help you reset your rhythm. So going back to the case real quick as we finish up, this is the zoomed in 40-year-old with the low cortisol awakening response that goes down instead of up. Remember, she's worse fatigue in the morning. She says, I don't feel alert or switched on, and her Hashimoto's symptoms feel worse. And as I said earlier, with the T cell school in the thymus gland, If you want to search it, the actual technical term is glucocorticoid induction of apoptosis of T cells that fail central tolerance in thymocytes. Yep, that's what it's called. So basically, we kind of just shorten it to say that failed central tolerance in the thymus gland. And then cortisol, of course, plays the big role. So, but when you're looking up research papers, that's what you'll read over and over and over again. And for her, possible increased risk in the future of blood sugar issues, especially in the morning. Feeling hypoglycemic, inflammation in the morning, recall memory issues, especially in the morning, because she's not getting that healthy cortisol awakening response. So for her, specifically focusing on self-care, sleep quality, she has to use her sleep mask, circadian rhythm optimization, getting light in the morning, darkness at night, focusing on blood sugar regulation, movement, hydration, community, and joy. And then to back up, supplement her with brain, adrenal, mitochondrial support at waking. This particular case, she happens to be somebody who takes her thyroid medication at night. And so it worked out well. She could take her brain, adrenal, mitochondria on waking. And by waking, within 30 minutes, to help really just reinforce that in the brain. In the morning, we get up. In the morning, we get up. In the morning, we get up. So for practitioners, it's really important that you heal yourself as well. So please try not to be this bird who looks all completely frazzled, trying to excel in their career, maintain a social life, drink enough water, exercise, text everyone back, stay sane, survive a pandemic, and be happy. Take care of yourself, practitioners. In summary, when you're talking to your patients or when you're listening to this and you think about it for yourself, take your stress and your allostatic load seriously, right? Stress often gets blown off. As humans, we can handle it. As humans, we are type A, but what happens is we burn our non-toxic candle at both ends, and then we do burn out, leading to disease. Don't do that. The stress response starts in the brain, but cortisol production ends in the mitochondria. So from top to bottom, you have to evaluate both. The cortisol follows the circadian rhythm by kicking off the day with the cortisol awakening response. And a healthy car is a marker of resiliency, but also an important marker for other functions like alertness and reducing autoimmune and memory and resilience, things like that. Testing the car is way more involved than just a traditional 4-point test. You want to hone right in on the morning. You want to do a Dutch plus, so you can get those saliva swabs that are very easy. You just pop them in your mouth, get it wet, stick it back in the tube, because you're going to do it at waking, 30 minutes later, 30 minutes after that. So waking, boom, boom, around dinner and before bed. And of course, you always want to address their cause. You're going to work with light and dark, evaluate their sleep, and focus, of course, on their waking moments, the waking 30 minutes. And with that, with 2 minutes to spare, that concludes our talk. So I hope that you have a much better understanding of the cortisol awakening response, the importance of the cortisol awakening response. And quite honestly, now you know how really relatively straightforward and easy it is to address the cortisol awakening response by focusing on the morning, right? Using light to your advantage, timing with supplements, the type of supplements. You're going to start sitting up straight. You're going to look at your breathing and things like that. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them with Anthony now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jones. You did an amazing job. And I think everyone really appreciates your ability to explain such an interesting and complex topic so well. So we did receive a lot of questions, and we now have some time for a live Q&A. So let's begin with the first question, which is, if someone wakes up and it's not sunny outside, what can they do instead to stimulate that car?
Yeah. So from a financial hierarchy, the movement first thing in the morning is quite helpful. Even if it's sun is rising, that is helpful. So waking up in pitch black versus waking up on a gray day are different. So pitch black, you may want to then invest into a $20 or $30 full spectrum light box. If it's a gray day, the gray counts. Gray is full spectrum light coming in, go outside, get some of that grayness in for 10 or 15 minutes. And then of course the supplements, you can still do any of the supplements as they fit your patient or yourself within that 30 minutes of waking to encourage the kickoff. So movement and light are the like free, cheap, and easy on waking. And then we get into the light box, and then we get into supplements as we kind of move up the hierarchy. And if you have somebody who's like really not doing well, like do them all. You can do them all. That's totally fine.
That's amazing. Obviously, I think everybody wants to do as many things as possible. So,
especially when they're free, cheap, and easy.
There you go. Next question is, if someone takes their thyroid medication first thing in the morning, how does that impact the CAR collection?
It doesn't impact the collection at all. Take your thyroid as normal because that's normal for you. So go ahead and stay on the thyroid. So if they take it at 6 a.m, right when they wake up, you want to, because of the timing of the CAR, and unless they have the thyroid medication like next to their bed with water, do the CAR collection first, then get up and go take your thyroid. Just be aware of how much water you drink because that will dilute your mouth. So if you are drinking water with your thyroid, then you want to make sure you've got, 15 or 20 minutes before your next collection to resalivate your mouth. But if it's next to your bed, I know plenty of patients who have it next to their bed. They can still do the cortisol collection first, so you don't dilute your mouth with water, then take your thyroid and then wait 30 minutes.
Thank you so much for that. All right, moving on to question number 3. Why does the Dutch test use saliva swabs and not tubes like other labs?
Because we pull our hormones out of urine. So other labs tried to do saliva swabs back in the day. And some of the hormones are sticky, so to speak, and they would stick to the swabs, the salivette swabs. And then they were underreporting numbers, not because they meant to, but because the hormone was still stuck on the saliva swab. So those companies then switched to tubes because free flowing saliva meant nothing to get stuck onto. And so they could get their hormones out of it. So we are not pulling our hormones out of saliva. We pull our hormones because we're also looking at metabolites out of urine. Therefore, we can use the salivette swabs, and cortisol's not sticky. In fact, it's the swabs that are used in all of the CAR research. CAR research doesn't use tubes, they use swabs. And so that's the route we chose to go because we're very particular focusing on cortisol with our swabs.
Amazing. Thank you for that high level detail.
Well, I've been in the industry a long time. So I don't know, there's, and I'm not bashing on this lab at all, but for those who know or ever use diagnostics way back in the day used to do swabs, and they found their progesterone kept getting stuck to it. So they flipped for some of their hormone stuff to tubes, and a few other labs as well. They tried swabs for a while, like 15 years ago, and oopsies, all their hormones were getting stuck, particularly progesterone. So they switched back to tubes.
Very interesting. I'm sure not many people know all of that. So
I've been in the field 22 years. So I've been in it a long time.
It's amazing. Okay, let's move on to question number 4. Can you re-explain the clock genes again and why light dark makes a difference there?
Yes. So the clock genes are in your brain, in your suprachiasmatic nucleus. They're your master regulator of your 24-hour rhythm, and they are set and reset specifically by lightness and dark. That's how they're set up. Other things like intermittent fasting or when you choose to eat or what time of day you exercise also makes a difference, but their master and trainers are lightness and darkness. That's what sets them up for success, because humans are a little longer than 24 hours. Our human body clock, believe it or not, is not 24 on the dot. So every day our clock genes want to run long and we have to pull them back. So to pull them back, we get light exposure in the morning, and then it's basically like resetting a clock or resetting your phone or the clock on your oven. And then the darkness at night, so the light sets it, darkness resets it if we've managed to screw it up. And the darkness, the best example are like you change time zones. And so your clock genes think you're West Coast, but your actual literal body is East Coast. So it's going to rely on light and dark to set and reset where you are. But it same applies if at home you have been up late working, you've been up late gaming, you've been up late watching movies, you've disrupted your circadian rhythm. So you have to use light and dark to get it back to 24 hours and follow the clock on your wall or your phone as opposed to the clock in the human body. So that's why light and dark are so important. They literally every single day pull us back to 24 hours versus running a little long.
It's very, very interesting. Thank you for that.
Yes.
And by the way, we had a lot of questions come in today. So if we're not able to get to yours, we will absolutely do our best to follow up. But we have time for one last question. And that is, if someone reports autoimmune symptoms all day, as opposed to just in the morning, but their CAR is low or flat, would you still work on increasing the CAR to help out with that?
100%, absolutely. Especially because working with the CAR is, I think, is very straightforward and very affordable. And in the grand scheme of autoimmune, you probably have them on other protocols, other things, other stuff they have to buy. And if you're like, hey, look, we're going to focus on the CAR by using light, by using movement, or by using, we're going to take your supplements, but we're going to specifically have you do them within 30 minutes of waking, whatever supplements you do. And you can get their CAR up if they, even if that helps their autoimmune 30%, 40%, maybe it'll help at 80%. I don't know. How awesome is that? That you just had to adjust some stuff for them in the morning and they already can tell a difference. I had a rheumatoid arthritis patient who was also a nurse, and she was really struggling with her autoimmune. She had a very disrupted schedule because obviously as a nurse, and her rheumatoid arthritis was really bad. She started doing morning walks. She would get up, she would throw her hair in a bun, she would take the dog for a walk. And she said within 2 or 3 weeks, she noticed a huge difference just by getting that light exposure in the morning. And she said, I could feel my system calming down and I just felt better. Nurses are hard because they tend to flip schedules a lot. But just getting that one feedback from somebody who was like, oh man, I'd really screwed myself up with my job. But by using light to my advantage in the morning, walking the dog, made a big difference in 2 or 3 weeks. And I was psyched to hear that was that quick.
So amazing what nature has given to us.
Exactly. Yes.
All right. Well, anyways, thank you so much for attending. That's all the time we have for today. Again, I know we had a lot of questions come through. Any questions that we were not able to get to today, we'll certainly do our best to follow up. But thank you so much for attending again. I want to give a big shout out to Dr. Carrie Jones here and Precision Analytical. You truly did an amazing job. And we hope to see everyone at the next live class. So thanks again.